I definitely need to give Chipwrecked some credit for being quite different to the previous two Alvin and the Chipmunks films. Usually, when you have sequels, there are only small changes to make it a little bit different from the previous films. But with each of the films, with the Squeakquel and then Chipwrecked, they've made significant changes so that it just feels quite different. However, while I didn't hate it, there were certainly moments in it that I liked. I do think it's the weakest of the three so far. This one was released originally in 2011, is directed by Mike Mitchell, and it starts off with this cruise ship and Alvin and the Chipmunks and your pets are all on the cruise. Everything's going really well. I think the set designs are brilliant. The energy is high, really kind of chaotic with a lot going on, but it worked really well as a solid introduction. And then Alvin, Simon, Theodore, Jeanette, Eleanor, and Brittany are stranded on an island. And I won't say exactly how they get there, but the bulk of the film is on this island. And I'll be honest, it's not that I didn't like the scenes on the island, but I just preferred the scenes on the cruise ship. I think there was more to do, there was more to look at. Also, something happens to Simon's character on the island that I didn't really care for. I won't spoil it in case you decide to watch it, but the events on the island, it's largely about them trying to survive, and as I said, it's a different environment. They've made a big effort to make sure that each of the films feel very different. With Squeakquel, they brought in the characters of the Chipettes and sent the Chipmunks to school. Very different from the first film. With this one, it's set on an island, definitely very different, giving us some different scenarios. Visually, it's very different. The characters are acting differently in some ways, and as I said, I don't really love Simon's character in this, but I can't really fault it as such. I think the narrative pacing is really good. It's very well filmed, it's very well written, there's some really good bits of dialogue. Nothing specifically that I mentioned, but there are just some nice lines here and there between the Chipmunks. The music isn't as good as it was in the first two films, at least in terms of personal preference. I think there were quite a few songs that I hadn't even heard of before, whereas I don't think that's the case with the first two films. Maybe that says more about me. I'm not very knowledgeable about music at all, but that's still something that affected my enjoyment a tiny little bit, because the music just seems to be less engaging here, and that was the case with the Squeakquel. The music in the Squeakquel was good, but not as good as the first film. And I have seen Road Chip, but I don't remember it very well, so I might watch it again. I can't remember if the music in that was very good, but certainly based on these three, it just seems to be getting a little less good each time. But as I said, on its own, it's not too bad. Had I never seen the other two films, or let's say I watched this one, this was the only one that existed, then it's fine. The narrative works well, the pacing is good, it flows well, the characters are great, but I don't love what happened with Simon. The characters' costumes were pretty great, particularly all of the Chipmunks. So visually, it was really attractive, and the narrative does work. The music, not that great for me personally. To compare it to the other two, I'd say it's quite weak, but I do applaud the effort they made to make it as different as possible from the other ones. I'd still recommend it, and I still enjoyed bits of it, but if I were to give a percentage of how much I enjoyed, I'm going to pluck numbers out of the air, but just by way of comparison, I'd say I enjoyed the first film 100%, the second film maybe 80%, this one we're probably going down to about 50%. So I didn't hate it, but comparatively it's not as good. But if you like the other two, Chipwrecked is definitely worth watching, but whereas I will watch the first film again at some point. I've seen it multiple times. I'm sure I'll see it again. The second one, I don't know, I might watch it again. This one, I can't imagine I'd watch Chipwrecked a second time. But as a one-time watch, it's not too bad.